Hey guys, tonight is really a night. The kind of night where the air feels like warm silk and the sky above is stretched velvet, scattered with a few lazy stars. You can hear the soft lap of the Nile's water against its banks, a sound older than your great everybody, grandparents. Out there beyond the flicker of small village fires, the desert stretches wide, quiet and patient. And rising from that pale sand are shapes so impossible, they almost look like tricks your sleepy eyes are playing on you. The pyramids, immense, immovable, like frozen mountains dropped from another world. You take them in for a moment knowing full well that no matter how much you've seen them in photos, your brain still isn't ready to compute what it's looking at. And before you get too cozy, thinking this is all postcard magic, let me remind you, you probably wouldn't survive building one of these things. I mean, even if you had the best sandals in the kingdom. These stones don't move themselves. Someone thousands of someone's had to bake in the Sun Hall drag chisel stack. It's not exactly your weekend home improvement project. If you enjoy peaceful bedtime stories like this, please support our channel by subscribing and hitting the like button. Now get cozy, take a deep breath, and let tonight's gentle tale carry you into a wonderful, restful sleep. And while you're here, drop us a comment. Tell me your location and the local time right now. Or just share what's on your mind, what you're feeling maybe, even the little things that have been weighing on you today. This is your moment to relax, unburden, and drift. As you lie there, let your mind grow soft and open, ready to wander through this gentle story until sleep finds you. So here you are, feet in the cool sand by the river, the scent of damp reeds mixing with the faint tang of limestone dust. Somewhere far off, a hippo grunts, because of course it does. Hippos are basically the loud neighbors of the Nile. A breeze stirs the papyrus plants, and in the distance the pyramids loom larger with every step you take toward them. The night wraps you up, making the stars shimmer above their sharp angles. The Nile is your guide tonight. It has always been Egypt's heartbeat, an endless flow from deep in Africa to the Mediterranean, giving life to everything along its banks. And yet here in the moonlight, you realize how close the pyramids are to its edge. Not because pharaohs liked river views, but because these watery highways were essential to carrying the stones that would soon become history's most iconic silhouettes. Historians still argue whether every block came floating down the Nile, or if some were dragged across the desert. Either way, each one is a testament to stubborn human ambition. Your sandals crunch over ground that feels older than time itself. The air smells faintly of baked dust, Egypt's perfume, and you feel as if you've walked straight into 2500 BCE. Villagers once camped nearby, working all day eating bread and onions, sipping beer thicker than stew. No, seriously, Egyptian beer wasn't your bubbly pint. It was more like chewable bread juice. Workers would laugh, sing, and complain about foremen who insisted the ramp angle was fine, even though everyone's calves were on fire. You glance upward at the nearest pyramid, and here's the part your modern eyes have to stretch. To imagine back then, these weren't sandy, crumbly triangles. They were covered in brilliant white limestone casing stones, polished smooth so that sunlight made them blaze like mirrors. Ancient writers claimed you could barely look at them at noon without squinting, and at night they'd reflect moonlight in a soft, eerie glow, guiding travelers and dazzling anyone foolish enough to think Egypt wasn't the center of the known world. The desert hums in that strange way deserts do, where silence is somehow louder than noise. You pass a half-buried stone block, its edges still sharp despite centuries of wind. Was this one rejected because it cracked during shaping? Or maybe dropped from a sled when someone shouted, "Watch the corner," too late? The quirky thing is archaeologists have found evidence of discarded blocks just like this, some carved halfway, some broken mid-haul, as if even the most ambitious projects couldn't avoid workplace bloopers. And still, you can't shake the feeling that the pyramids are alive in a way, not breathing but listening. Every grain of sand that's brushed against them, every gust of wind whistling past every human footstep in their shadow, it's all part of their story. And tonight that story is unfolding for you one slow step at a time under the Egyptian moon. You keep walking toward the looming shapes, their sheer presence flattening every other thought in your head. The closer you get, the more you feel their impossible scale tugging at your sense of reality. You've seen big buildings before, skyscrapers, stadiums, maybe even those malls where you get lost and end up eating 3 pretzels before finding the exit. But this is different. The pyramids don't just tower, they dominate. And in the warm Egyptian night, they feel less like buildings and more like geological events that just happen to be built by people. But why? Why would any culture, no matter how ambitious or sunburn resistant, decide to stack millions of stone blocks into mountains? The simple answer, if there even is one, has to do with Egypt's deep obsession with the afterlife. For the pharaohs, life was basically a warm-up act. The real show was the eternity waiting beyond death, and the pyramids were their all-access VIP pass. They weren't just tombs. They were cosmic launch pads carefully designed to guide a king's soul into the realm of the gods. It's not that other cultures didn't care about their dead, they did. But Egypt took it to an art form. You have to imagine a society where religion, government, and architecture were braided into one giant plait of purpose. The pharaoh wasn't just a ruler. He was a living god. And when you're a god, you don't settle for a modest grave behind the local temple. You want something so big and so permanent that even 4,500 years later, people still gasp and point at it from the window of a tour bus. Historians still argue whether the pyramid shape itself was meant to symbolize the sun's rays or to act as a staircase to heaven. Some think it was both. Ancient Egyptian texts speak of the pharaoh climbing to the sky to join Ra, the sun god, and help him sail across the heavens each day. Imagine the marketing pitch. Your Majesty, with this new model pyramid, you'll ascend to godhood in style and beat the morning traffic to the afterlife. But there's more. The pyramid wasn't just a personal spiritual project. It was a political billboard. Every stone shouted, "Look at our power. Look at our resources. We can do this and still have time to invent eyeliner." Other kingdoms might have strong armies or fine palaces, but Egypt had the audacity to reshape the horizon itself. These monuments told friend and foe alike that Egypt was stable, organized, and here to stay for eternity, or at least until someone invented bulldozers, which thankfully no one did. The quirky thing is pyramids weren't the first choice for royal tombs. Earlier pharaohs were buried in mastabas, flat-roofed rectangular tombs. Nice practical but hardly skyline material. Then came the genius/madman idea of stacking mastabas on top of each other. This experiment birthed the step pyramid of Giza around 26 and 30 BCE, a sort of 6-tier wedding cake of stone. It was revolutionary, and you can almost picture the ancient crowd murmuring in awe, and maybe a few architects quietly panicking about the math. From that point on, Egypt's rulers were hooked. Bigger, taller, grander became the mantra. The pyramid shape evolved into smooth-sided perfection, each new project pushing the boundaries of what humans could achieve with nothing but stone rope and sheer willpower. Of course, the decision to build a pyramid was like signing your entire kingdom up for the ultimate group project. We're talking decades of planning, quarrying, transporting, and stacking. Thousands of workers, endless supplies of food tools and beer. a massive economic engine spun into motion, not just to serve the dead king, but to keep the living busy, fed, and ideally loyal. As you pause at the pyramid's base, your hand brushes against the rough limestone. Even in the moonlight, you can see tiny fossilized shells embedded in the stone, reminders that much of Egypt's desert was once seabed. These blocks aren't just building materials. They're time capsules holding whispers from a world millions of years older than the pharaohs themselves. You trace the line of one block to the next, imagining the calloused hands that placed it here with precision that still humbles modern engineers. A warm breeze drifts across the sand, carrying the faint scent of the river and the distant smoke of cooking fires. Somewhere, a desert fox yips quick and sharp before the night swallows the sound. You stand there, dwarfed and small, staring upward at the sloping wall that rises, until it slices into the sky. And in that moment, you start to understand. The pyramids weren't just built for the dead. They were built to make the living remember their place in the grand, unshakable order of things. You linger at the base, the cool night air brushing your skin, as your gaze climbs those ancient slopes. The stone steps before you aren't the neat staircases of a palace. They're jagged and irregular, worn by millennia of wind sand and the quiet weight of time. But in your mind's eye, you peel back the centuries. You strip away the crumbling edges and return the structure to its first days, when it was new, when Egypt was still learning the art of pyramid building, when the whole thing was a bit of an experiment. You think back to that first daring leap, the step pyramid at Saqqara. It wasn't smooth-sided like the giants of Giza. It was a layered stone cake. Pharaoh Djoser had turned to his brilliant architect Imhotep, a man so good at his job that later generations would basically make him a god. Imhotep didn't just lay stone. He laid the foundation for a new era of ambition. Historians still argue whether he invented the pyramid design outright or just refined a long-standing tradition of stacked mastabas. Either way, you have to admit it was bold and a little weird. Imagine you're an ancient Egyptian strolling into Saqqara for the first time and seeing this strange towering staircase to the heavens. You'd never seen anything like it. The limestone gleamed under the desert sun. The steps rose in perfect order, each one leading higher, almost daring the pharaoh's spirit to climb straight to the gods. This was no dusty burial mound. This was power and eternity in stone. But here's the thing about experiments. Not all of them go smoothly. Cue the bent pyramid at Dashur, built for Pharaoh Sneferu, a man whose life's work could have been summed up as pyramid practice. They started building it with ambitious, steep sides, but halfway up they realized the angle was a little murderous. If they kept going, the whole thing might collapse faster than a bad tent in a sandstorm. So they literally changed the angle mid-build, giving the pyramid its distinct bent profile. It still stands today, the architectural equivalent of a sheepish grin. And then there was the Red Pyramid, also by Sneferu, named for the rosy hue of its stone. This time, they got it right. The slope was gentler, the stability better. No mid-project panic attacks, just a perfect sleek-sided monument. By the time he was done, Sneferu had built more pyramid volume than any other pharaoh, basically the ancient Egyptian version of binge building a real estate empire. The quirky thing, the Giza pyramids, the ones everyone thinks of, were actually latecomers to the game. By the time Khufu decided to plant his pyramid on the Giza plateau, Egypt had already had decades of trial error and oops moments to learn from. Khufu just took it to the extreme. His Great Pyramid is not only the largest, but also a mathematical masterpiece, and yet historians still argue whether Khufu was a genius or a tyrant, or maybe both. You run your fingers over the rough edge of a block and think about those early builders standing in the blistering sun, trying to figure out the right angle, the right weight distribution, the right everything. There were no blueprints in a tidy binder, no engineers with laser levels. Just the human brain, the human body, and the kind of determination that probably made a lot of people very, very cranky. Even with all that trial and error, each pyramid carried with it a leap of faith. No one really knew if it would stand for thousands of years. And yet here they are, shrugging off sandstorms like they're just another Tuesday. Above you, the sky deepens, and the moon paints the edges of the pyramid in silver. Somewhere out there in the desert, jackals pad silently over the sand. A faint chill creeps into the night air, and for just a second you picture Imhotep himself standing here squinting up at his creation, wondering if he'd just changed Egypt forever. Spoiler alert, he had. The moon slides higher, its pale light tracing the edges of the pyramid until they almost glow. You take a slow breath, feeling that soft hum in the air, the same hum you feel when you stand in an ancient place that still remembers exactly why it was built. And tonight the memory is pulling you toward one of the great strange truths about these monuments. They aren't just big stone piles. They are maps. They are clocks. They are messages written in geometry. The more you stare, the more your eyes drift upward past the rough edges, past the invisible tip where the polished white casing stones used to end in a shining golden capstone. And if you keep going, your sight climbs right into the sky, where the stars still burn, just as they did for the ancient Egyptians. And here's where things get strange. These pyramids weren't placed randomly. They're aligned with a precision so eerie, it still gives modern surveyors a headache. The Great Pyramid of Khufu, for example, is aligned almost perfectly to the cardinal points north, south, east, west. And we're talking perfectly here. The deviation from true north is so tiny, it could make your GPS blush. Historians still argue whether this was achieved through observing the stars, the sun's shadow, or some lost surveying trick that we've yet to rediscover. No matter the method, the result is the same, a monument in conversation with the cosmos. And then there's the Orion connection. You've probably heard the theory the three main pyramids at Giza line up with the three stars of Orion's belt. Was this intentional or just a cosmic coincidence? Egyptologists debate this over strong coffee and probably stronger opinions. For the ancient Egyptians, Orion was linked to Osiris, god of the afterlife, so the symbolism would have been perfect. Imagine a pharaoh's soul rising straight from his tomb to join the god among the stars, guided by architecture itself. But the alignment games don't stop with Orion. The descending passage of the Great Pyramid points directly toward the pole star of its time, Thuban, in the constellation Draco. And then there's the solstice connection, the sun rising and setting in perfect alignment with certain corners and faces on particular days of the year. Is the kind of precision that makes you wonder whether the builders were just showing off. Of course, there's always the fringe theories. Some say the pyramids are ancient power plants beaming mysterious energy. Others swear they're beacons for extraterrestrials, while the evidence for those is, let's say, politely lacking. The fact remains, these structures feel like they're tuned to something bigger than themselves, even if it's just the slow, reliable dance of the earth and sky. You stand there thinking about the logistics. Imagine trying to align millions of stone blocks without a single crane laser level or GPS satellite. You'd have surveyors standing in the desert with strings poles and maybe a few "Hey Scoot" that a hair to the left moments shouted across hundreds of meters. And yet, somehow they got it so right that it's still right after 4.5 millennia of Earth wobbling on its axis. The quirky thing. The ancient Egyptians didn't just align the pyramids, They aligned their entire spiritual worldview. Life was ordered, the cosmos was ordered, and death was just a continuation of that order. The pyramid wasn't a lone building. It was part of a grand cosmic grid. The night air is cooled a little now, and a shiver runs over your arms, not just from the temperature, but from the quiet awe pressing in on you. You're looking at stone that was cut, moved and set down exactly where it needed to be, to face exactly the direction it needed to face, to speak exactly the message it was meant to speak to the universe. Above you, Orion's belt still gleams each star like a pin of light in a vast black curtain. You don't have to believe in gods or cosmic staircases to feel it. This is a place where human hands reached out not just to the future, but to the heavens. And somehow, 4,500 years later, you're standing in the middle of their outstretched fingers. You let your eyes drop from the sky back to the stone. It's easy to get lost in the stars, but the truth is, no matter how mystical the purpose, these pyramids were still made of solid, back-aching reality. And reality meant stone. Lots of it. The sheer amount of stone used in the Great Pyramid is enough to make your knees wobble just thinking about it. Around 2.3 million blocks each, weighing anywhere from 2.5 to over 15 tons. Some were quarried right here on the Giza Plateau, close enough that you could almost roll them downhill into place. But the real magic, the logistical nightmare kind, came from hauling stones from faraway quarries. The limestone casing stones, they came from Tura, across the Nile, gleaming white and fine-grained. The massive granite blocks that line the king's chamber, those were dragged or maybe floated from Aswan, over 500 miles to the south. You imagine the workers down there in Aswan, sweating in the sun, chiseling each block with copper tools until it was perfect, then loading it onto boats. Copper, yes, copper. Soft enough that it wore down constantly, meaning tools had to be resharpened and replaced in an endless cycle. Historians still argue whether the big stones travelled entirely by river, or whether they also crept across the desert on sledges. The popular theory, a combination. During flood season, the Nile swelled, making it possible to float huge loads closer to the site. From there, the stones might be dragged on sledges over packed sand. And here's the quirky part: ancient paintings suggest workers poured water onto the sand ahead of the sledges. This wasn't just to keep the dust down. Wet sand is more compact, reducing friction. It's like ancient engineering's version of WD-40. Picture it: teams of workers chanting in rhythm, muscles straining as they drag a block heavier than your car, inch by inch, toward the waiting ramp. The sound of wood scraping against stone, the slap of sandals on sand, the occasional foreman yelling, "Pull louder than necessary." And the quarries themselves were loud, dusty and busy. You can almost hear the ringing of hammers on chisels, the crack of wedges splitting stone, the scrape as blocks are pried loose. There's the smell of hot limestone baking under the sun, mixing with sweat and crushed greenery from bundles of reeds used as padding. Dust coated everything: your hair, your tongue, even the inside of your nose. No one left a quarry looking fresh. But there's a strange beauty in it too. In some ancient quarries, you can still see unfinished blocks, half-shaped, still fused to the bedrock, abandoned when a crack spoiled the cut, or a pharaoh's priorities shifted. They're frozen moments of work, like someone pressed pause 4,000 years ago. And then there's the sheer planning. You don't just pick up a 15-ton granite slab like you're rearranging the furniture. Everything had to be measured, scheduled, coordinated, each block fitting into its appointed place in the growing pyramid. The wrong size, the wrong angle, and suddenly you've got a structural mess that even Imhotep's ghost would shake his head at. The night air carries the faint rustle of sand and for a moment you imagine standing at one of those quarries back in the Old Kingdom. You'd see hundreds of men at work, stonecutters, rope makers, water carriers, foremen pacing with arms crossed, donkeys braying in the background, someone cracking a joke about how this block looks heavier than the last, even though they're all absurdly heavy. And somewhere, a master builder stands with a wooden tablet marking off which stones are ready for the next shipment north. You turn back toward the pyramid and look at it again with fresh eyes. Every single one of those millions of stones had a journey born in a quarry, ferried by river, or dragged over sand shaped to perfection, then lifted into place by sheer determination. It wasn't magic. It was mud, sweat, sunburn, and genius all rolled together. And somehow it worked so well that the result is still here, keeping its secrets under the Egyptian moon. You step back from the towering wall of stone, letting your gaze sweep over the pyramid's shadow. It spills long and black across the sand, and you realize something important. This place wasn't built by faceless, nameless slaves in chains, no matter what the old Hollywood movies told you. The real story is far more human and far more impressive. The people who built these pyramids were skilled workers, stone cutters, engineers, carpenters, rope makers, haulers, cooks, medics. They weren't dragged here against their will from foreign lands. They were Egyptians proud of their craft, paid in rations of bread, beer, and onions, and housed in nearby workers' villages. Think of it as one of the world's first big long-term work camps, but without the grim cruelty we often imagine. Just over the hill from the Giza plateau, archaeologists have found the remains of these villages. Mud brick houses arranged in neat rows, communal bakeries with massive ovens where loaves baked in bulk for thousands of mouths, breweries that could churn out gallons of thick, nourishing beer each day. The smell of yeast and roasting grain would have drifted on the breeze, mixing with the sharper scent of sweat and limestone dust. You can picture the camp coming alive at dawn, fires crackling in the cookhouses, bakers pulling hot loaves from the ovens, the rhythmic pounding of dough echoing from open doorways. Men and women bustling between houses, children running errands or helping carry water jars. And then the steady stream of workers heading toward the ramp's tools, slung over their shoulders, chatting in clusters, as the sun began its daily climb. Historians still argue whether there was a permanent full-time crew of specialists who worked year-round, supplemented by rotating teams from farming villages who came during the Nile's flood season. The flood meant the fields were underwater, so farmers could take on other work without losing their crops. It's a system that kept the economy ticking while building the most ambitious structures on Earth. And make no mistake, these workers had skills passed down through generations, cutting limestone to precise dimensions, fitting blocks so tightly that even a blade of grass couldn't slip between them, designing ramps that could bear the weight of multi-ton stones without collapsing. These were not random laborers fumbling in the dark. They were master craftsmen solving daily problems in real time. That's not to say the work was easy. Injuries happened, crushed fingers, broken bones, sunstroke. Archaeologists have found evidence of medical care in the workers' remains, healed fractures, splintered limb signs of surgery. The camp had its own medics probably experienced from years of treating similar injuries. And yes, they had pain relief, herbs, beer, maybe a bit of opium poppy for the tougher cases. There was camaraderie here too. You can almost hear the teasing banter between work gangs, the good-natured competitions over which crew could haul more stones in a day. Gang names have been found scrawled in red paint on some blocks, things like the Friends of Khufu or the Drunkards of Menkora, Egypt's equivalent of Team Awesome or Ramp Crew 3000. And the food, bread, onions, fish from the Nile wasn't just fuel, it was a statement. The pharaoh wanted his builders strong, healthy, and willing to keep showing up. A hungry, mistreated workforce doesn't finish a pyramid. A well-fed, respected one does. That's the real miracle here, not just the engineering, but the management. As the desert night deepens, you imagine walking through that village long ago. Lantern light spilling from doorways. The smell of beer mash bubbling in giant vats. The warm laughter of tired men sharing their last drink before bed. Tomorrow, they'll rise before dawn and return to the ramps. But for tonight, they rest proud of the part they're playing in something that will outlast every one of them. The pyramid looms behind you, silent witness to the truth. This wasn't a monument built on misery. It was built on community skill and an unshakable belief that together they could raise stone mountains to touch the stars. You shift your feet in the cool sand and let your eyes follow the long slope upward, imagining the countless hands that once worked in perfect rhythm here. Every single block, whether fresh from the quarry or dragged from the riverbank, had to be coaxed into place with tools so simple you could hold them in one hand. And yet, with those tools, they built something we still can't fully explain. The backbone of their craft was copper. Copper chisels for cutting limestone, copper saws for shaping, copper adzes for smoothing. Copper isn't as hard as modern steel, it dulls quickly, so tools had to be sharpened constantly. You picture a workman in the shade of a tent, a whetstone in his lap, grinding the edge of a chisel until it gleams again, then wiping the sweat from his forehead before heading back to the ramps. And the ramps, oh the ramps. Historians still argue about their exact design. Some think they ran straight up one face of the pyramid. Others say they spiraled around like a giant stone parking ramp. A few even imagine a combination long, straight ramps for the lower layers, then spirals or internal ramps as the pyramid rose higher. Whatever the method, the ramps had to be strong enough to bear the constant pounding of human feet and the groan of sledges dragging tons of stone. There's an image in your mind now, hundreds of men straining at the rope's sandals, digging into the packed earth of the ramp. The foreman calls out the gang chants back in unison, and with each synchronized pull the block inches forward. Sometimes the sled would snag and the crew would lean in, harder muscles quivering until it slid free again, with a groan like a ship leaving port. To make the sledges glide more easily, workers poured water onto the sand ahead of them. It wasn't just to settle dust. Wet sand is firmer, meaning less resistance. Ancient paintings even show this detail, a man standing at the front with a jug splashing the ground, so the heavy load behind him could move just that little bit smoother. Once a block reached its designated level, it was nudged into place with levers, simple wooden poles wedged under the stone, and heaved downward using the physics of leverage to coax the block into perfect alignment. The sound of stone meeting stone was sharp, final, almost ceremonial. And alignment mattered. Builders worked with plumb bobs, measuring cords and sighting tools, no lasers, no spirit levels, just the patient logic of geometry and the steady hands of people who understood their craft. The accuracy of the Great Pyramid is so precise that some modern engineers have admitted they'd struggle to match it without heavy machinery. Of course, even the best planned system had its snags. Imagine hauling a block for days, only to find it's a few centimeters too long. Back to the chisels. Or worse, what if a ramp collapsed under a load? That meant weeks of repair before work could resume, not to mention a very unhappy architect. But the work went on day after day, season after season, until the pyramid slowly grew upwards, swallowing the skyline. The quirky thing is, they didn't just build with brute force, they built with rhythm. Songs and chants kept the hauling crews in sync, turning grueling labor into something almost like a ritual. You can almost hear it in the wind tonight, that low, steady call and response echoing up the slope, rolling back into the desert, like the heartbeat of the project itself. And there's a moment, if you let yourself really feel it, when you realize how intimate this was. Every stone was touched, shaped, and placed by human hands. No cranes, no forklifts, no cold automation. Just the shared will of thousands to raise a mountain one block at a time. You glance back up the slope again. The ramps are long gone now, melted back into the desert. But for a moment, you can almost see them rising toward the sky, each one crowded with men tools glinting in the sun ropes, taut sledges grinding forward. And you know that without those humble vanishing ramps, there would be no pyramids at all, only dreams carved in the sand. You press your palm against the weathered limestone, feeling the faint chill it has gathered under the moon. It's one thing to stand outside and marvel at the sheer size, but stepping inside is a different kind of journey. You take a slow breath and imagine ducking into the narrow entrance passage where the warm desert air fades into a dry, ancient stillness. The smell changes too, less dust from the open sand, more the closed-in scent of rock that hasn't seen sunlight for thousands of years. The first thing you notice inside is how quiet it is. Not just quiet, thick quiet. Every sound you make is swallowed almost instantly by the stone. Your footsteps turn into soft, flat echoes. Even your breathing feels heavier, like you're intruding on a place that doesn't want to be disturbed. You shuffle down a low, sloping corridor so low you have to stoop your hand, skimming along the smooth inner walls. These aren't rough like the outer core blocks. These were cut and polished with deliberate care. They guide you deeper, deeper, until the outer world feels impossibly far away. Historians still argue over the exact purpose of every corridor and chamber inside the Great Pyramid. The King's Chamber is the most famous, lined with massive granite blocks hauled all the way from Aswan, each one weighing as much as an elephant. The precision here is unnerving. The blocks fit together so tightly, you can barely slip a blade between them. Above the King's Chamber is a series of relieving chambers designed to distribute the crushing weight of millions of stones so the ceiling wouldn't collapse. It's like an ancient silent insurance policy. Then there's the Queen's Chamber, not actually for a queen despite the name. No one is entirely sure what it was for. Some think it was an alternate burial chamber. Others believe it had a ritual purpose, maybe tied to the pharaoh's journey to the afterlife. And tucked away within the pyramid are even narrower shafts, tiny tunnels, that seem to aim at specific stars. Were they symbolic pathways for the sole ancient ventilation systems? Or something we still haven't guessed? The quirky thing is the inside of a pyramid isn't the cavernous maze you might expect. It's compact, deliberate, almost minimalist in design. It's not meant for the living, it's a space designed for one soul's eternal voyage. The winding corridors, the rising passages, the hidden niches, they all feel like part of a sacred code, a map the dead could read. You picture yourself holding a flickering oil lamp, its golden light licking the walls, revealing carved marks left by ancient builders. Some are practical quarry marks, instructions. Others are graffiti, the names of work gangs, sketched animals, little human figures. These aren't tourist scrawls. They're the fingerprints of the men who hauled cut and placed the very stones you're brushing against. And then there are the blocking stones. Massive slabs slid into place after burial to seal the passages forever. Or at least, that was the idea. These granite plugs are wedged so tightly that even with modern tools breaking through them is no easy feat. They were meant to be permanent barriers keeping the pharaoh's body and treasures safe from the living. As you creep farther in your mind's eye, the air feels different, still dry, but denser somehow, as if it remembers all the ceremonies that once filled it, the chanting of priests, the wail of mourners, the careful placing of offerings for the pharaoh's next world. You can almost hear it now, faint and distant, like an echo that's been looping in this stone chamber for 4.5 millennia. Outside, the desert breathes under the stars, but here inside the pyramid holds its own breath waiting. Everything you see was meant to be hidden from the sun forever. And somehow, even knowing that countless explorers have crawled these same passages, it still feels like you've trespassed into the afterlife's private hallway. You close your eyes for a moment and let the weight of stone and silence sink into you. The pyramid is no longer just a monument. It's a memory you're standing inside. You step back out into the night in your mind, blinking as the moonlight washes over you again. The air feels lighter now and cooler, carrying that faint mineral scent of limestone dust. You've been inside, you've seen the tight corridors, the hidden chambers, but now your thoughts turn to the people who made sure those spaces stayed untouched. The guardians, the ones who kept watch long after the final block was set in place. In ancient Egypt, tomb security was both a practical necessity and a sacred duty. A pharaoh's resting place wasn't just a grave, it was a treasury. Gold fine linens, furniture, ceremonial weapons, alabaster jars of perfumed food for the journey to the afterlife. All of it was meant to stay sealed forever with the king. But wealth like that has always been a tempting target, so the Egyptians developed layers of protection. First came the human element priests and guards assigned to watch over the site. Some were stationed nearby for years, living in small outposts or temple complexes built next to the pyramid. They tended to offerings, kept rituals going, and made sure no one wandered too close. You can picture them in their white linen kilts, staves in hand, scanning the desert horizon for trouble. Then came the architectural tricks. The entrance itself was often disguised hidden behind smooth casing stones so well that you wouldn't even see a doorway unless you knew exactly where to look. Once inside, corridors were deliberately cramped, sloped, or broken by sudden drop-offs to slow intruders. Some pyramids included false passages that went nowhere, ending abruptly in solid stone. Others had heavy portcullis blocks, massive slabs of granite ready to be lowered into place to seal the way behind. And then there were the traps, or at least the ancient equivalent of them. Historians still argue whether the Egyptians really rigged lethal devices, or whether they relied more on sheer stone barriers and psychological deterrence. One thing's for sure, the idea of curses took care of a lot of the rest. Ah, yes, the curses. Those ominous inscriptions warning that anyone who disturbed the tomb would be struck down by divine wrath. Things like death shall come on swift wings to him who disturbs the king's peace. Not exactly subtle. Whether these were genuine religious warnings or just early security theatre, they worked well enough that even in modern times, people still shiver at the thought. The quirky part is the most famous curse story, the so-called Curse of King Tut, comes from a tomb built over 1,000 years after the Pyramid Age. And yet, the association stuck. In popular imagination, all Egyptian tombs became ticking supernatural time bombs. Even today, step into a dark corridor deep inside a pyramid and tell me you wouldn't feel a flicker of unease. The guards themselves had to be as much psychologists as sentries. They knew most intruders weren't fearless masterminds. They were desperate thieves, often from nearby villages, hoping for a quick score. The trick was to make the pyramid seem untouchable, even haunted. And the truth is, for a while, it worked. But as centuries passed, Egypt's centralized power weakened, and the resources for permanent security faded. Tomb raiding became inevitable. Still, in the Old Kingdom's golden days, When the pyramids were fresh and gleaming, the idea of breaking into one would have been unthinkable for most, not just because of the guards or the traps or the curses, but because the pharaoh was more than a man. He was the bridge between people and gods. To disturb his rest was to invite chaos into the world. You stand there now imagining a lone guard on a cool desert night, much like this one. The moon throws his shadow long across the sand as he leans on his staff, scanning the horizon. In the distance, a jackal trots between the dunes, its eyes catching the light. Somewhere far off, a caravan bell jingles. The guard shifts his stance, patient, alert, knowing that his post isn't just about protecting gold. It's about guarding the very order of the universe. The pyramid behind him looms silent, its secrets locked away, its king asleep within. And for now, at least, the Guardian's watch will hold. The moon is riding high now, pouring its silver light over the desert and the towering pyramid. You stand at its base, and your thoughts slip naturally toward the treasures that once rested within those glittering, delicate things meant not for the living, but for a pharaoh's eternal reign in the afterlife. Inside, beyond the granite plugs, beyond the winding passages, the burial chamber would once have been a sight to steal your breath. At its heart lay the sarcophagus, sometimes carved from red granite, sometimes alabaster, housing the mummified king. But this was just the beginning. Around him were stacked goods fit for a ruler who fully intended to keep ruling after death. Gold death masks to preserve the likeness of his divine face. Canopic jars to hold the organs, each topped with the head of a protective deity. Chests overflowing with jewelry, inlaid with lapis lazuli and turquoise. Historians still argue whether all these goods were meant literally for use in the afterlife, or served more as magical symbols imbued with protective spells. Either way, the effect would have been dazzling. Imagine holding an oil lamp in that chamber and seeing gold glint from every corner, the light catching on polished silver, the green of malachite, the deep blue of lapis. The air thick with the scent of resins and unguents, meant to preserve both body and spirit. And there was furniture, ornate beds, chairs, even chariots. Not the rough, everyday kind, but masterpieces carved from rare woods, inlaid with ivory, painted in brilliant colors. There were weapons too, ceremonial daggers, bows, and maces, not for war, but for symbolic protection. Even food and drink were provided, baskets of grain jars of honey-dried dates and preserved meat. The king's journey to the afterlife wasn't going to be a camping trip. It was going to be first class all the way. The quirky part is some burials even included small boats, full-sized or miniature, symbolizing the solar bark of Ra, the vessel the pharaoh's soul would ride across the heavens. At Giza, near Khufu's pyramid, archaeologists discovered one of these full-sized boats buried in pieces within a sealed pit. It was so perfectly preserved that when reassembled, it looked ready to sail again. You picture the funeral procession the king's body carried on a gilded bier, priests chanting incense curling into the hot air. Courtiers and family following behind their linen robes, whispering with each step. They pass through the mortuary temple, where offerings are made, prayers recited. Then, with solemn care, the body is brought into the pyramid's inner sanctum. Once the sarcophagus is sealed, the chamber is stocked. The blocking stones slid into place, and the entrance hidden forever. Historians still debate whether every pyramid burial followed the same elaborate steps, or if variations crept in, depending on the pharaoh's wishes, the political climate, or even the season of death. But what's certain is the intention to send the king into the afterlife, not as a ghost in rags, but as a ruler wrapped in glory. Standing outside in the quiet night, you imagine all of it still locked away inside the gold, the linen, the carefully painted chests. You know most of it is gone now, stolen by time and thieves. but the idea remains as solid as the stone around you. The pyramids were not empty monuments. They were vessels filled with everything a god-king could possibly need to rule in the land beyond. And somewhere inside in the dark, you can almost hear the whisper of linen, wrapping the faint creak of a golden chair. The soft clink of beads against a wooden chest echoes of treasures that once gleamed brighter than the moonlight spilling over the desert tonight. You linger in that imagined chamber, the gold and polished stone shimmering in your mind's eye. But of course, when you pull yourself back into reality, you remember most of those treasures didn't last. The ancient Egyptians might have planned for eternity, but eternity has a way of letting in the curious, the greedy, and the desperate, and sometimes the superstitious. Step into the shadow of any pyramid, and you'll quickly run into the most famous whisper attached to them, the curse. The one that warns in some variation death will come on swift wings to whoever disturbs the king's peace. It's the sort of line that makes your skin prickle a little, even if you laugh it off. The Egyptians knew the power of words, especially carved in stone, and they weren't shy about using it. Now here's the quirky thing. There's very little evidence that actual pyramid tombs carried such curses. Most of those dramatic warnings turn up in later periods or in the tombs of nobles rather than pharaohs. But Hollywood newspapers and breathless 1920s headlines didn't care about those details. When Howard Carter opened Tutankhamun's tomb over 1,000 years younger than the Great Pyramid, the sudden deaths of a few people connected to the discovery set imaginations on fire. Soon, the curse of the pharaoh was front-page news around the world. Historians still argue about what really happened. Some blame coincidence. Others point to natural explanations: bacteria or mold sealed in the tomb for centuries suddenly released into the air. But whatever the truth, the story stuck. And now, thanks to the press of 100 years ago, every pyramid in the public mind hums with a supernatural warning label. Even before modern curse fever, the Egyptians themselves were masters at building mystery. Think about it. You're a would-be tomb robber in 2300 BCE, creeping toward a pyramid by night. You know there are guards. You've heard rumors of hidden traps. Maybe someone swears they saw a shadowy figure inside moving without a sound. Maybe your cousin went in last month and hasn't been seen since. Your heart's pounding. Your torch shakes in your hand. Would you still go in? Some did. Many turned back. And yet, human greed is stubborn. Over the centuries, some tomb robbers braved the dangers. They chipped through stone, slid past blocking slabs, and found their way to the burial chamber. When they did, they emptied it: gold jewelry, ceremonial weapons, fine linens gone. They might have feared the wrath of gods, but they feared poverty more. It's not just the loss of treasures that hits you. It's the loss of that first moment of stillness. That feeling the builders intended that no living person should ever stand in that sacred room again. That was stolen too. You take a breath of the cool night air and think about the way stories cling to stone. You can walk around a pyramid today and still feel that tug of unease. The desert wind hisses softly against the limestone, almost like a warning. The moonlight makes the blocks seem to shift just a little, as if they're watching you back. Maybe that's the real curse, not some supernatural lightning bolt from the gods, but the way these places get inside your head. Once you've stood in their shadow, you carry them with you. You dream of their corridors. You feel the weight of their stone pressing down on your imagination. And the more you think about them, the more you wonder if the Egyptians didn't plan for exactly that. Because fear can be a guardian too. You tilt your head back toward the pyramid, that impossible mountain of stone, and wonder how it's still holding secrets after so many centuries of exploration. Surely you think by now we've seen it all. We've crawled into every passage, mapped every chamber. But the truth is, there's still plenty hidden inside. One of the most tantalizing recent discoveries came not from a sweaty archaeologist with a torch, but from particle physics. Yes, particle physics, because apparently even the pyramids have gone high-tech. In 2017, scientists used muon tomography, a scanning technique that tracks cosmic particles passing through solid matter, to peer inside the Great Pyramid. And what they found shook the archaeological world, a massive, previously unknown void above the Grand Gallery. Historians still argue about what this void is. Some think it's a structural feature, a giant cavity to relieve pressure and keep the pyramid from collapsing. Others believe it might be an undiscovered chamber, perhaps part of a hidden network meant for ritual or symbolic purposes. And of course, fringe theorists have been gleefully suggesting treasure rooms, secret archives, or even alien control centers ever since. And it's not just the void. In 2015, thermal imaging detected temperature anomalies on the pyramid's eastern side. Certain blocks were warmer than others, possibly indicating hidden passageways or voids just beneath the surface. It's as if the pyramid is teasing us, offering glimpses of what it's still hiding, but never enough to explain it outright. There are construction quirks too. Blocks in the lower layers are huge, perfectly placed. Higher up the stones are smaller, yet still meticulously aligned. Was this just a matter of practicality, less weight to haul higher? Or does it hint at phases of construction we don't fully understand? Some archaeologists think the pyramid might have been altered mid-build. Its angle adjusted, its chambers re-planned. Others disagree, arguing for a perfect master plan from day one. The quirky part. Even with modern tools and satellite mapping, we still can't say exactly how they move certain blocks into position, especially those 70-ton granite beams in the King's Chamber. No ramps we've imagined seem entirely practical for such loads. And yet, there they are, sitting quietly above your head as if gravity has been politely ignoring them for 4.5 millennia. Every time you think you've wrapped your head around the pyramid's mysteries, another puzzle shows up. A newly translated inscription here, a radar scan there, a chisel mark that tells a story you never considered. The stones themselves seem to shift under the weight of all these theories. You imagine the ancient builders watching us from somewhere beyond time, smirking at our elaborate diagrams and 3D models. Maybe they'd be impressed. Or maybe they'd just say, "You're overthinking it." We knew exactly what we were doing, and maybe they'd be right. Historians still debate whether the Great Pyramid was primarily a tomb, a cosmic machine, or some combination of both. But whatever its purpose, one thing is certain. It wasn't built to give up its secrets easily. And even now, under the gaze of satellites and laser scanners, it continues to play coy. You take a step back, letting your eyes run from base to tip. Somewhere in there, hidden under hundreds of feet of stone, the pyramid is still holding onto a truth no one has yet spoken aloud. And as the desert wind brushes your face, you can't help but think it's going to keep that secret for as long as it wants. You linger in the cool desert air, the pyramid's shadow stretching long and deep behind you, and your mind drifts to an angle you can't ignore. These colossal tombs weren't just about the afterlife. They were political weapons monuments in stone that shouted the pharaoh's supremacy to every eye that dared to look. From the moment construction began, the entire kingdom knew whose name would be carved into history. The pyramid itself became a campaign poster, an ego monument, and a divine billboard rolled into one. When Khufu decided to build his Great Pyramid, he wasn't just thinking about resting comfortably among the gods. He was making sure his rivals and subjects alike saw the limits of his power as non-existent. Historians still argue how much of this was religious devotion versus political theatre. Ancient texts certainly paint the pharaoh as a sacred figure, the literal son of the sun god Ra, whose divine duty was to maintain Ma'at, the cosmic order. But Ma'at wasn't just about the gods. It was about earthly stability too. And nothing says I'm in charge quite like commanding thousands of skilled workers, engineers, and laborers to reshape the horizon in your honor. The quirky part is that the pyramids also acted like ancient press releases. Imagine you're a visiting dignitary from a far-off land. You crest a hill and boom, there's this gleaming white mountain of stone dominating the landscape. Your jaw drops. You know instantly this is a kingdom not to be trifled with. It's a message without a single word carved in it, understood across every language. Even for everyday Egyptians, the pyramid was a constant looming reminder that their ruler was no mere mortal. Farmers, traders, and craftsmen might only visit Giza once in their lives, but when they did, the sight would sear itself into their memory, and that memory would ripple outward in stories told around cooking fires and in village marketplaces. Some scholars suggest that large-scale building projects like this helped cement loyalty. The pharaoh provided work rations and the chance to be part of something eternal. In return, the people gave their labor, and perhaps more importantly, their admiration. It was a mutually reinforcing loop. The pyramid glorified the pharaoh, the people built it, the pharaoh's prestige grew, and so did the kingdom's cohesion. You can almost hear the conversations that would have taken place. A merchant from Nubia might lean toward his host over a cup of beer and say, "So tell me, is it true your king is building a mountain?" The Egyptian would smile gesture toward the horizon and reply, "No, he's building forever." Of course, political propaganda isn't always subtle. The very scale of the pyramids was a flex and architectural version of a royal decree carved into the skyline. Even neighboring rulers would think twice before considering any move against a state that could command such resources for decades without faltering. And yet, that political message was always wrapped in the softer sacred language of eternity. The pharaoh wasn't bragging, at least not openly. He was fulfilling destiny, honoring the gods, and ensuring the cosmic balance. The pyramid was proof of divine favor, proof that the gods themselves backed his rule. Standing there now, the night wrapped around you, you realize how cunning that is. The pyramid works on two levels at once. It humbles you spiritually and overawes you politically. It tells you the ruler is chosen by the gods and also happens to be the most powerful human you'll ever lay eyes on. And just in case you forget, there it is looming in your peripheral vision. Every time you step outside, you take one last look up its slope and you swear that even in ruin stripped of its gleaming white skin, the pyramid still wears a crown made not of gold, but of awe. You step away from the base, letting your eyes follow the gentle curve of the Giza plateau. Out here in the still night, it's easier to imagine the other half of the story. The pyramid wasn't just a monument to power and faith. It was also the beating heart of a massive economy. The moment a pharaoh decided to build a kingdom-wide machine, whirred into motion. Quarrying crews were sent upriver. Boat builders shaped timbers into transport vessels. Farmers knew they'd have extra mouths to feed in the coming seasons. Bakers and brewers prepared to increase production. It was less like a single building project and more like launching a national industry. Historians still argue whether pyramid building strained Egypt's resources or actually strengthened them. On the one hand, the scale was staggering: millions of limestone blocks, hundreds of granite slabs, vast quantities of copper tools, ropes, wood, and fuel. On the other, much of the labor came during the Nile's flood season, when farmlands lay underwater and agricultural work was on pause. This meant farmers could earn extra rations and avoid idle months keeping their families well fed. The quirky part is how self-sustaining the pyramid economy could be. You had huge bakeries churning out tens of thousands of loaves a week, breweries producing beer thick enough to double as breakfast, herds of cattle and flocks of geese fattened to feed workers. Markets around the workers' villages thrived as potters, weavers, and toolmakers found steady demand for their goods. It was as if the pyramid itself was a magnet drawing in every craft and trade in the kingdom. And there was trade, real long-distance trade. Some materials couldn't be sourced locally. The cedar wood for boats came from Lebanon. Certain copper tools were smelted from ores brought from the Sinai Peninsula. Semi-precious stones for ceremonial items travelled from as far as Nubia. Every delivery was another thread in Egypt's expanding network of influence. You can picture the docks along the Nile during peak construction barges moored side by side, their decks piled high with stone timber baskets of grain jars of beer. Stevedores call to each other over the splash of oars. Supervisors check tallies on wooden tablets. The air is thick with the smell of fresh bred hot dust and river mud. Even the logistics of moving goods became a kind of art. The Nile was the central artery, and from it causeways and ramps branched toward the construction site. Imagine the sight from above, lines of workers and animals like streams of ants, each one carrying a piece of the pyramid's future. And for the locals, the pyramid meant opportunity. Young men might sign on as haulers or quarrymen. Skilled artisans could find work carving fine casing stones or painting decorative elements for the associated temples. Women could supply bread beer or woven goods. The whole enterprise blurred the lines between royal ambition and community livelihood. Historians still debate whether this system enriched the kingdom in the long run, or placed an unsustainable burden on it. But what's clear is that during construction, the pyramid was not just an architectural wonder, it was an economic engine. Standing here tonight, you can almost hear it, the hammering in the quarries, the chanting on the ramps, the calls of boatmen on the river, all of it blending into the steady, relentless heartbeat of an empire building itself into eternity. And somewhere in that hum, the pharaoh's name echoes a name etched in stone, and in the daily lives of every soul who touched the work, you draw a slow breath, feeling the warm wind from the west stir the edges of your tunic in your mind's eye. The pyramid towers behind you, its perfect geometry fixed against the stars. But you know, this, like all golden ages, wouldn't last forever. The era of building such monumental tombs was not infinite. By the close of the Old Kingdom, Egypt began to change. Resources that once flowed easily toward royal projects were stretched thin. Climatic shifts brought lower Nile floods, meaning less fertile land and smaller harvests. Famine whispered along the edges of the kingdom, and with it came political instability. A monument like the Great Pyramid demanded decades of wealth and order. Without both, it simply couldn't be built. Historians still argue which came first: economic decline making pyramid construction unsustainable, or shifting beliefs in the afterlife, making them unnecessary. Perhaps it was both intertwined like reeds in the river. In the later dynasties, tombs moved to new forms, rock-cut tombs in the Valley of the Kings, hidden deep in cliffs, rather than standing proud on the horizon. The idea was to conceal the burial, rather than advertise it to every would-be tomb robber. The quirky thing: even during the pyramid age itself, later kings sometimes opted for smaller, less elaborate structures. Some built quickly in cheaper materials, their pyramids crumbling into ruin within centuries. The aura of perfection that Giza exudes was already fading, and as central authority weakened provincial governors, once loyal administrators began to rule their regions almost as little kingdoms of their own. Without the tight grip of a strong pharaoh, the massive labor networks that fed pyramid projects dissolved. A construction project that once felt like the will of the gods began to look like an impossible luxury. Religion itself evolved too. The belief that only the pharaoh could achieve eternal life began to soften. Texts and rituals once reserved for royalty trickled down to nobles, then to commoners. The afterlife was no longer a divine monopoly. It became an accessible hope for anyone who could afford the proper rites. With that shift, there was less need to pour the entire kingdom's strength into one colossal tomb. Standing on the plateau now, you can almost hear the quiet that must have followed. No more thunder of sledges on ramps, no more crowds of laborers swarming like ants over the rising sides. The quarries went silent. The workers' villages emptied. The ramps crumbled into sand. The pyramids didn't vanish, of course. They stood as they still do, but their role changed. They became relics of a past so grand it seemed almost mythical to the Egyptians who came after. Imagine a farmer in the Middle Kingdom gazing at the Great Pyramid with the same awe and disbelief you feel now, wondering how in Ra's name their ancestors had ever pulled it off. And yet those ancestors had. They left behind stone mountains whose shadows still stretch across the centuries. But the age of building them was over. What had once been the empire's proudest calling card had become a monument to a chapter closed an era when kings could marshal the whole of Egypt to reach for eternity in limestone and granite. The desert wind shifts whispering over the plateau, as if carrying the voices of those who lived in that long, faded golden age. Their work is finished, but their story is still here, written in the unyielding angles of stone. You stand with your back to the pyramid, staring out toward the desert horizon, and imagine the first foreigners who ever saw it. Long after the last ram had crumbled into the sand, and the workers' villages had been swallowed by time, the pyramids still rose unchanged in their impossible geometry. They became more than monuments, they became wonders. The ancient Greeks were among the earliest outside visitors to leave written accounts. Herodotus, the father of history, arrived in Egypt around the 5th century BCE and wrote about the Great Pyramid with a mixture of awe and guesswork. He claimed it took 100,000 men 20 years to build a figure historians still argue over. He described elaborate ramps, endless labor, and even hinted at secret chambers. And whether he got every detail right or not, his words spread through the Greek world, seeding the idea that Egypt was a land of marvels beyond imagining. The quirky thing to the Greeks, the pyramids weren't simply royal tombs. They were proof of Egypt's ancient genius, a skill that seemed almost magical. Some even believed they must have been built by demigods or under the guidance of divine beings. In an age without cranes, engines, or steel, how else could you explain them? Then came the Romans. By the time they arrived, Egypt was under their rule, but the mystique remained. Wealthy Romans toured the sites much as modern tourists do, standing in the desert sun, marveling at the scale, chipping off small pieces of stone to take home as souvenirs. The pyramids loomed in the background of their paintings and mosaics, eternal symbols of human ambition. Medieval visitors added their own layers of myth. Islamic scholars fascinated by the pyramids speculated that they were built long before the biblical flood to preserve ancient wisdom and treasures. Some believed they were vast storehouses holding the knowledge of lost civilizations. Others saw them as astrological monuments aligned not just with the stars, but with hidden truths about the universe. Travelers from far-off lands, Persia, China, even distant Europe, brought back tales that transformed the pyramids into almost supernatural creations. And the more the stories were told, the taller the legends grew. By the time the Renaissance rolled around, the pyramids were already woven into Europe's imagination as emblems of both mystery and mastery. Historians still debate how much of these accounts were based on direct observation and how much was embroidered for dramatic effect. But one thing is clear: no one who saw the pyramids ever forgot them. They were and still are impossible to ignore. Standing there in your mind's eye, you can picture a Greek merchant shading his eyes against the blazing Egyptian sun, a Roman patrician posing for a sketch with the pyramid looming behind him, a medieval scholar scribbling theories in a leather-bound notebook, each one looking up at the same impossible shape you see now. And across all those centuries, across all those different tongues and beliefs, one thread runs through every account: the pyramids defy time. They were old when Alexander the Great rode into Egypt. They were ancient when Caesar's ships touched the Nile. They were already legends when the Crusaders camped within sight of them. You turn back toward the looming shadow at your side. For a moment, you feel like one of those travelers, another tiny figure in the long parade of human beings who have stood here, looked up, and tried to understand how these stone mountains came to be. And just like them, you realize the pyramids will outlast you too. You stay rooted in place for a long while, the desert breeze brushing your face, and your thoughts drift to the present day. How after thousands of years, the pyramids still haven't surrendered all their truths. Archaeology here isn't finished. It's still very much alive. Modern excavations no longer look like the frantic treasure hunts of the 19th century, when teams blasted through walls and hauled off artifacts with barely a sketch in the notebook. Today, the work is slower, more deliberate, almost surgical. Archaeologists sift sand by hand-scan blocks with lasers and map every grain of soil before turning over the next one. The goal isn't gold anymore, it's understanding. Historians still argue over countless details exactly how the ramps worked, which crews did what, even the true timeline of construction. But in recent decades, whole new layers of the pyramid story have emerged. Worker cemeteries discovered near Giza have revealed skeletons with healed fractures, signs of medical care, and a diet surprisingly rich in protein. Nearby kitchens filled with bread molds and animal bones confirm that these were not starving slaves, but a well-fed, organized workforce. The quirky part: some discoveries come from accidents. In 2013, researchers examining a 4,500-year-old papyrus at the Red Sea port of Wadi al-Jaf stumbled upon something incredible: the diary of a man named Mera, an overseer, involved in transporting limestone to Giza. His log described ferrying blocks along canals from the quarries at Tura, giving us one of the clearest first-hand accounts of pyramid logistics ever found. It wasn't myth, it was paperwork. Technology has also become a new kind of archaeology. Ground-penetrating radar, infrared imaging, and muon scanning keep revealing hints of voids, hidden shafts, and construction anomalies. And while some results baffle experts, they keep pushing the story forward. Every scan feels like the pyramid tapping you on the shoulder and saying, "Still looking good. You're not done yet." And then there's conservation work. Modern engineers study erosion patterns, chemical weathering, even the microscopic growth of lichen, to figure out how best to protect the stone from modern pollution and the crush of millions of annual visitors. These efforts are their own kind of race against time, because although the pyramids have stood for millennia, nothing endures forever, not even these. You can imagine an archaeologist today standing in the same spot you're in now, brushing sand from their boots, squinting into the golden light. They're part of a chain of curiosity stretching back to the first Egyptian, who ever stopped mid-walk and stared at the pyramid in wonder. That chain runs through Greek historians, Roman travelers, medieval chroniclers, Napoleon's scholars, 19th century explorers, and now to you. And still, the great questions linger. Did the ancient builders leave secret messages in the geometry? Will we one day find a perfectly preserved burial chamber still sealed beneath the stone? Are there vast underground networks we haven't yet mapped? The desert doesn't answer. It just holds its silence as it always has, letting the wind sweep across the plateau. You feel the weight of it, this sense that the more we learn, the deeper the mystery becomes. The pyramids don't simply tell you their history. They invite you into a conversation that might never end. You take one last look up their towering slopes and realize that maybe that's the point. The pyramids were never meant to be solved like a puzzle. They were meant to inspire. You stand in the moon-washed silence, the Great Pyramid looming at your side, and it strikes you that everything you've seen tonight, every block, every ramp, every alignment with the stars was never meant for you at all. It was for a single man, a king, who walked this earth over 4,000 years ago, and for the gods he hoped to join. Yet here you are, an intruder from the far future, listening to its stone-bound whispers. The desert hums softly around you, the air holding that cool mineral scent that only comes when the sun has been gone for hours. The wind strokes across your skin, like the lightest fingers carrying with it grains of sand that have touched this monument since the day it was born. It feels timeless. You think of the people who made this possible, the quarrymen in the hot sun, the haulers leaning into the ropes until their muscles screamed, the craftsmen shaping blocks to perfect angles, the bakers and brewers feeding thousands, the medics tending crushed fingers and twisted ankles. Their names are gone lost to history, but their fingerprints are still here in the chisel marks, in the tool scars, in the exactness of the stone's placement. Historians still argue over so many details how the ramps worked, what the hidden voids mean, whether every alignment was intentional or just an accident of genius. But there's one thing no one disputes: the pyramids endure because of a human will so stubborn. It outlasted kingdoms, empires, and ages. The quirky thing. In their own time, these pyramids weren't ruins or relics. They were alive, gleaming white limestone under the sun, golden capstones, flashing like fire at dawn, processions of priests and mourners moving at their base, chants rising into the air. To the people of ancient Egypt, they weren't looking at history. They were looking at the present. And yet those people are gone. The priests' voices have faded, the golden capstones are missing, the casing stones weathered away. But the heart of it remains. Even stripped bare, the pyramid's outline still slices into the sky, like the first day it stood completed. You run your hand along its surface and feel its answer not in words but in weight. It tells you that human dreams can be carved in stone, that faith can be measured in millions of blocks, that time itself is a tide that cannot wash everything away. Above, Orion's belt gleams in perfect alignment, just as it did when the first block was laid. You exhale slowly, and in that moment you understand why these monuments still draw us in. They are reminders that even though we vanish, our work, our hope, and our wonder can last far longer than we do. And now, as you stand here in your mind, let the scene begin to fade. The sharp edges of the pyramid soften in the moonlight, its slopes blending into the desert's quiet embrace. The wind moves more slowly now, as if even it is growing drowsy, brushing its cool breath across your cheeks in long, lazy sighs. The sounds of the ancient world, dim footsteps in the sand, the creak of sledges, the murmured chants of workers all slipping away into a hush. What remains is stillness, warm, deep stillness, the kind that wraps around you like a heavy blanket. You picture the pyramid standing alone through the centuries, watching dawn after dawn spill over the horizon watching the stars wheel in slow, eternal arcs above it, its shadow stretching and shrinking with the sun, but never truly leaving. It is patient, it is constant, and now it waits only for the next morning's light. Your breathing slows. Each inhale draws in the cool, dry air of the desert night. Each exhale carries away the last of the day's weight. You feel your body sink deeper into rest, your limbs growing heavier, your thoughts slower and softer. Above you, the stars blur slightly as your eyelids grow heavier. Orion's belt remains 3 steady lights in the vast sky, guiding your gaze toward stillness. The desert's silence is complete now, no footstep, no whisper, just the slow heartbeat of the earth beneath the sand. And as you drift, the pyramid becomes distant, hazy, a soft outline against the sky. It does not vanish, it simply fades into the gentle dreamscape forming around you. You carry it with you now, not as stone, but as a feeling, the quiet strength of something built to last, the deep comfort of knowing it will stand long after the night has passed. Sleep comes like the desert dawn, slow, certain, and full of peace.